the last time that the Canadiens won, there was tons of damage, $2.5 million in damage. There was 168 injuries, including 49 police officers. But the police at the time explicitly stated that their strategy was to avoid confrontation. And in this looting, there's a great quote by an anonymous fan that the AP picked up. The Habs fan was quoted by saying, "The Habs won. They all got big bonuses. This is what we get."
The interview you're about to listen to is between myself and Alex MacMillan. Alex, through his account, Spark Solidarity, wrote this piece about Habs fans being attacked by the police. In it, he kind of goes into the details of the shows of force by the police against Habs fans after the Habs beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round. And he's putting to question why public money is being used to brutalize people who are just celebrating a sport. I reached out to Alex. I was like, I like the piece. I want to know more about what you think about these things, because clearly, as you've seen on our show, I'm kind of interested in these intersections between sports and politics. I really enjoyed this discussion. We kind of get into depth about the history, the long history of sports rights in Montreal, and the sort of specifics of how Montreal Police, the SPVM, reacts to hockey games and the big crowds there. You know, very often they're using the same tactics they use against pro-Palestine organizers, protesters, against the student strikes. It's all the same tools now being used against not protesters, but members of the general public who are celebrating a win. Lots of important questions, lots of relevant topics, especially in the middle of the playoffs. Here's the interview. Hello. My name is Colin Danspa. You are listening to Local 514. We are in the middle of playoff fever here in Montreal. I'm sure everyone feels it. Yesterday, we had a crazy game against Buffalo. By the time this episode has come out, we will be approaching Game 6. But it's not all fun and games. In fact, there are some people who are quite against fun and games, I think some would say. Not my guest today, Alex MacMillan, creator of SparkSolidarity.ca, as well as the person who runs the Spark Solidarity Instagram account. We're here today to talk about the playoffs, but more specifically, how public money is being spent on it. Before we get into that, thank you very much for coming on, Alex.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the real serious topic, what do you think about the Habs so far, this playoff run?
I'm pretty much I'm a born again Habs fan, so I'm very much into it. I was I wasn't sure if they were going to get past Tampa, but after seeing the way that they played in the past two games, I'm all aboard. Like, who knows how far this team can go? I'm super excited.
Yeah, I think if we can have more game 2s and 3s that we saw in this series against Buffalo, I think it'll be perfect sailing. It seems like Buffalo can't really adapt the same way the Habs can, and they're sort of choking right now. But who knows? They're a very talented team. Lots of young, big players. We'll see how it goes. So I have you on, of course, not to talk about this Buffalo series on the way, but to talk about, not even to talk about the game itself. We're kind of talking about events surrounding the game. Many people who watch this might be familiar, at the home games in Montreal, outside the Bell Center, there's huge crowds. There's crowds all over the city for the playoffs. I think a lot of restaurants, bars are reporting, huge increases in revenue for them because everyone's out watching the game, spending money, celebrating, right? Unfortunately, sometimes at these home games around the Bell Center where they have these big official watch parties, there's a heavy police presence.
Yeah.
And after the series deciding game against Tampa, which Montreal won, there was a bit of a police, how would you call it? Show of force against Habs fans. Escalation, yeah. So Alex, through Spark Solidarity, wrote a bit about it, drew some attention to the kind of show of violence that the SPVM was doing against Habs fans. You had some great photos in there by William No, William Wilson.
Yes.
Yeah, showing just the kind of like the chaos of the night. But yeah, talk to me a little about what made you want to bring attention to this.
Yeah, the William Wilson photos on the night of the game, as well as the video, he just did great work covering it, as well as my friend Josh Fisher is another really good videographer who just caught some just egregious shows of force from the Montreal Police. They were essentially dispersing the crowd. What they claimed was because of fireworks, in a means that was just absolutely absurd and egregious. Attacking young fans with batons, doing the type of thing that they do to protesters. You know, our comrades in the pro-Palestine movement and things like that. It was in the video that Josh shared. The police are batting their shields and going after the crowd, and the crowd is just stunned.
Lit on fire. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that didn't take long. Oh my God.
It's not proportional to what's out there. And for me, just having covered much of these egregious acts on behalf of the SPVM, it was just a good opportunity to highlight this in a frame that is much more open to the public, because Habs fans are Habs fans. They're regular people. They're not radicals. They might be radicals in the hockey sense, but it was just it was very frustrating to see, but also very predictable.
Right.
And that stuff writes itself, and it was a good opportunity to just highlight it. And after you had contacted me about doing this, I did some more research about it, and there's very much like a process. This doesn't just happen out of nowhere. There's a process that led to how we got to cops attacking fans in Suzuki jerseys.
Right. I think the images are so it's interesting, right? Because I think the images of cops brutalizing people, I think in Montreal is such a unfortunately a commonplace thing, right? You see them doing that at protests, the student strikes, a lot of pro-Palestine demonstrations, any of the anti-capitalist or anti-police ones, you'll see that kind of show of force. And I find it so curious when they start to I don't know, when their target starts to get a little wider, and they start attacking like Habs fans as well. I mean, I think some people remember in 2021 during that Cinderella Story Cup run the Habs had, the SPVM at one of the home games just tear gassed the crowd without provocation.
No.
It was just pure it was just nothing was happening. They won and immediately tear gas.
Tear gas ticket holders too that were leaving the arena, and then not to mention during a pandemic where people are supposed to be wearing respiratory protection. One of I didn't live here at the time, but when I saw that as an outsider, it was just like just absolutely ridiculous. And the police claim that they do these things to maintain international prestige for the city. That made them look like fools.
Of course,
Yeah.
International prestige is really, it's a funny thing to claim after when the SPVM has been cited by the UN for breaching human rights and how they're kettling people and trapping people during the student strikes. So I'm really excited about this conversation because I think there's so many aspects of, let's say, sports life, civic life, and also police tactics against protesters that sort of intersect here in really interesting but unfortunate kind of ways. I saw you've done a lot of research about the sort of history of this. So this is not, of course, we're talking about 2021. This is not really the first time that the cops have used these sort of measures against Habs fans. There's clearly a precedent that they're concerned about. Can you tell me a bit about what the history is there?
Yeah, and like I'm a big sports head, and to very cliche thing, but to explain this, we got to go back to the 19th century, and this because in Montreal specifically, because of like ethnicity, because of language, because of just the milieu of culture in the city, and also like the difference of class and how that class is stratified based on lines of ethnicity and language. There Sports has always been an arena for class struggle. It's always been an arena for unity of different classes against other classes, right? And this goes back even before the Montreal Canadiens to the 1870s with lacrosse. There's been fans for as long as there's been sports in Montreal, there's been sports riots, and in those sports riots and those that type of civil unrest caused by sports has always been on class and ethnic lines, right? And the most well-known sports riot, as far as like in history in Montreal, I think is probably the Richard riot, where Maurice Richard struck a linesman during an altercation in a hockey game, and ended up getting suspended for the season and the playoffs by the NHL.
At the time, well, he was like the star
Yeah.
of the league.
Oh, I mean, like he was a saint, like
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
And at the time, the NHL president was Clarence Campbell, who was a Anglophone and was perceived as like the institutional embodiment of league authority in a time when the NHL was institutional in a way that akin to like the government, especially for hockey fans. And Clarence Campbell came to the Montreal Forum for some reason, and a riot broke out. There was tear gas inside the Montreal Forum deployed against fans, looting across the city. There was hundreds of arrests. And this is a good example of just how I was saying. In the 1870s, there were sports riots on these ethnic class lines, and it went on for almost 100 years. Now, the one aspect of this that most people don't know is that these types of riots went on for many years. In not all of them were sports riots, and a much lesser known riot is the Murray Hill riot, and this one is specific to this and what I'm talking about is because that riot happened because the Montreal Police walked off the job, essentially. And this is a great example as to how the police, all over the world, police institutions operate. They have a monopoly on violence. They use violence to their benefit when it benefits them, and they do violence to their benefit when it benefits them. The Murray Hill riot culminated in a massive riot outside of the Murray Hill limousine cab stand. One provincial police officer was actually killed in a shootout. There were 6 bank robberies during the time, and what it culminated in was the police got what they wanted. They got a pay raise. They got that's how the SPVM became the modern SPVM because of consolidation of what was over 24 different policing institutions. In that instance, it really shows how the police are able to, stand down to make it so that the violence that occurs happens to their benefit.
Right.
You know what I mean?
They step back and they're like, "Look, you need us. You need us specifically, I think, to be a force of sort of like crowd control, right? It's not like it's a bunch of beat cops who are like, no, we need to do our little beat cop jobs better and walk around the block. It's specifically this thing about riot suppression and crowd control.
Yeah, and this type of thing goes on for that type of posture that the police take. It goes on for another 30 years. There was riots in '86 when the Canadiens won. There was riots in '88 when the Canadiens won, and then the one in ~93. Again, the last time that the Canadiens won, there was tons of damage. $2.5 million in damage. There was 168 injuries, including 49 police officers. But the police at the time explicitly stated that their strategy was to avoid confrontation. And in this looting, there's a great quote by an anonymous fan that the AP picked up. And I think this is very foundational to what the point that I'm making here. The Habs fan was quoted by saying, "The Habs won. They all got big bonuses. This is what we get." And I think that's very, it's a core element here, because the fans, when the players win, when the management wins, you always hear, "We are nothing without our fans," right? And the same applies to the businesses around that area. That area has value because of the fans. And at the time in '93, 25% of Montrealers were below the poverty line. It was like almost 11% unemployment. There was, public sector workers were getting laid off. It was just again, an element of class, right? And it's just very not surprising that you see, the more and more that capitalism and neoliberalism takes hold, that it's not just a celebration that leads to looting. It's specifically for looting, And again, this posture of the police kind of sitting back, it goes to for many years up until 2008. And in 2008, there was a large. It's when the Habs beat Boston in Game 7.
Great time. That was a great time. I remember that. I remember that playoff round very fondly.
Yeah, and the Game 7, they blew out Boston. They won 5-0, and this is when there was as a young person living outside of Montreal, they made the headlines by the rioting and the cup celebration. Not the cup. It was like a cup celebration.
Of course.
I remember even Don Cherry said something about Habs fans. They were classless or whatever. And in that time, there was the police. The police claimed that there were 16 arrests that night, and the police claimed, this was a quote from the chief, he said that it was a highly organized group of arsonists and young people organized to commit criminal acts. And there was one Reebok merchant who was quoted to also say it was highly organized looters who had walked off with 14 high-end shoes, but all of them were left feet. And
that's how organized they are.
Right. And so in this instance, this culminated in a civil suit from 2008 that took it took 10 years to resolve. And in this instance is when I think everything pivots. In 2010, again, the Habs beat the Penguins 5-2 again in Game 7. The Habs have a ton of Game 7s. It's crazy.
I know. It's tough being a Habs fan.
But they win.
Of course. Yeah. But the just the pure stress of it. I wish they could win in 4, just like that,
Yeah. Anyway, in that 2010 one, this one was really interesting because there was again another bunch of looters, and the police themselves admitted in that instance that none of them that were arrested in that instance were ticket holders. They didn't go to the game. They might not even have been Habs fans, and so. In those instances, we see the civil suit is being put forth, the Montreal v. Lenardi, and that case is making it so that the liability cannot be put on individual looters for other damage that has been caused, right? Like say if I were to have gotten caught as a quote unquote rioter, vandal, right? I couldn't be responsible for somebody else's damage that happened down the street, right? And that's the way that the posture was. So in 2018, that's when that civil suit came down. But in the meantime, in 2014, there was another. The Habs beat the Bruins again, 3-1 in Game 7, and they advanced in that instance to go to the East Final against the Rangers. And what do you know? The police had an absorption posture because the civil suit was already in, right? So
what do you mean? What do you mean by absorption posture?
Well, they weren't standing in riot gear. They weren't ready to suppress the crowd. And there was very little. There was fewer than 10 arrests, and mostly for just common mischief. And there was no pepper spray that was dispersed.
Very different than let's say the Richard riots or the '93 riots. Then
Even different than the riots 4 years earlier that caused the civil suit. And this really highlights what I was saying back with the '69 Murray Hill riot. It shows that the police are willing to stand down if it benefits them. And I believe that in the instance of 2014, they stood down thinking that there was going to be another large outburst from the crowd. And what do you know? There wasn't, because they weren't there ready to brutalize them. And that goes back to, the whole instance, the whole institutional operation of the police is not necessary for public safety. It kind of is detrimental to public safety if they're there to brutalize the public.
Of course, to tear gas people.
Yeah, to tear gas people like they did in 2021. Now, I believe that now we are living, the 2021 instance is the perfect example, because it's now become where, we all, so many people on the political left talk about, the police are there to protect capital. I believe in Quebec and the way that this has been set up because of this Lenardi case. It's exactly like that. That's they're only there to protect capital. I was in Toronto in 2019 when the Raptors won the championship. There was no police in riot gear going to attack people.
It was very different then.
Yeah, and even a couple of months ago in Toronto, when the Toronto Blue Jays went to Game 7, there wasn't police in riot gear. There was just plainclothes police, because they're very much. I think it's culturally different. There's an institutional difference, and it has to do with the way in which these laws have been implemented through a process that the police are dictating. And I don't really think that the public is fully aware of it, because it just seems like that's just the way it is, but it's not. There's a dialectical process that gets there.
Right. There's things that the cops will do or won't do to give themselves more power over the course of wherever their tenure.
Yeah.
Right? And I guess what we're seeing this year, right, to bring it back to now, is sort of the culmination of all those different moments that they, I guess, garnered more funds for themselves, or that it's interesting when that the civil kind of suits changed the way that they approach these crowds as well.
Yeah, and I think that there's a bunch of levers that can be moved to make to change this, right? I believe that, like I said, the Montreal Police are enforcing. The Montreal Police are using their enforcement to protect capital, but that capital and that revenue is being generated by the fans.
Sure,
the fans are the ones who are bringing the value to that whole area. The beneficiary is not, it's the fans in like the cultural sense, but the beneficiary in the material sense are the businesses. It's the Quebec Corps, Group CH, who owns the Canadiens, the businesses all around that area. Those should be the people who are incurring the costs of, if there are to be, damages caused by the fans, then they should be the ones incurring the cost. And then that way you are able to have the police to use that absorption posture so that we can have peace and celebration instead of cops brutalizing people in Suzuki jerseys.
Right. Of course. Yeah. It's kind of interesting, because it's like you think of it as like this use of like public funds, right, to police these like games, which are essentially to the benefit of these like private people. Of course, there's the argument that people make that like, the Habs matches it's such a public event, and so that's why people think they have to do that. But like, it's interesting, I think, especially hearing about the difference in how the police in Montreal handle it versus the police in Toronto. You're talking a bit about right now about how these private businesses and the people sort of around like the downtown core of where all these celebrations happen, how they should incur the cost. But like, what does that look like? Is that like private police? What are you envisioning for that kind of solution?
I mean, I'm not going to advocate for private police in any way, but I do think, like, again, I lived in Toronto in 2010 for the G20 riots. Plywood works fine. You know what I mean? And if you think that you're going to incur damages, what exactly are those damages? Is it smashed windows? like I said, plywood works fine. When I lived downtown during the G20, there was trucks waiting for the processions to come through, and then they would put plywood up, and then the plywood stayed up for many days, and then there was no smashing of those windows again. Obviously, it's not the most practical, but if we're actually doing it for the purpose of public safety, then wouldn't that be better than, again, brutalizing Suzuki fans or tear gassing ticket holders? Like I said, it's not necessarily just about this process that leads to this institutional process through civil litigation and things like that leads to the police having expanded powers, but it's also normalizing it because we see that same type of tactics used against protesters.
Right.
And so they want to expand it to normalize it so that, businesses everywhere accept that this is what the police do when there's disruption.
Right.
Equating a massive celebration from a sports team winning a championship or advancing in a playoff round to an actual disruption that is a protest, and it's just we're the public should be the one dictating these terms, not the police. And I believe that because of the way that this dialectical process is happening over a very long period of time, the public isn't fully aware of it.
Right. What do you think is something important for the public to be aware of? I really like your point about plywood being much cheaper than like just riot cops, right? Like imagine like whatever, like these riot cops are obviously getting like overtime for this. Anytime they do one of these big events, it's like hundreds of personnel, if not thousands, attending these events. Plywood is much cheaper.
Yeah,
plywood is much, and even just like on like even just on an economic argument, it sounds like just having plywood up on these stores downtown would be a little cheaper than having the risks of all this police escalation. Yeah,
I think the two biggest things that I would want to say to the public is the first thing, because I was a manager of a sports bar. I've been around sports teams for my whole life. Fandom in itself is like, it's kind of crazy. People, it's a phenomenon. People do
spiritual almost.
Yeah. People do things that they wouldn't think that they would do because their team won or lost, right? I think a big thing is to allow that in a way that, as long as it's not detrimental to public safety. A big thing that I see is like the public ends up cheering on the cops because it's like almost creates this like no true Scotsman type like framing where it's like, those aren't real fans. Right. You know what I mean? And I think that's just, if we care about public safety, one fan and another fan, they should be equal, whether it's a ticket holder or a person who is at a bar near the arena or a person who's just even outside in the street. The other thing is that I think that, like I said, there's levers to reduce this type of these type of violent outbursts from the police. There was recently a municipal bylaw that tried to be passed where they tried to implement a law against the police dispersing chemical tear gas against crowds, and that failed. I think that a motion that is specifically for the area around the Bell Center would have better traction because it's not for the entire city of Montreal. And then this way, again, we're protecting the public, because this idea that, Habs fans are inherently violent or inherently have this tendency for rage it's just absurd. And then the other thing, I think the most realistic thing is some type of insurance fund that is in that same zone around the Bell Center, where Group CH, Quebecor, the downtown BIA, they are part. It's we have no fault insurance in Quebec for car accidents, right? So this type of thing where there needs to be the liability has to go somewhere. That is the exact thing that is creating the process in which the police are standing on every corner, chasing people down. Like William Wilson put it, as this dump and chase tactic, right, where they're brutalizing people and chasing them down narrow streets just to clear the area. And I think that process wouldn't be there if there was a way to ensure that property owners and the public are protected. And right now, the public is not being protected; they're being brutalized.
Only private property is being protected by the cops. Then, not
Yeah.
really the public.
Yeah,
No, absolutely. There's a real funny image out of those sort of shows of violence from the cops and the Habs fans. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like there's a Cybertruck downtown, and a bunch of cops are just around it protecting it against Habs fans. It's like, come on, guys, let's not the Cybertruck. It's like, why? I don't know why you guys think the Cybertruck deserves more protection. It's interesting, right? Because they're like these rabid, classless leftist Habs fans. They're gonna be going after the Cybertruck because of Elon. It's like, what are you talking about? And it's like, you're absolutely nuts, you know.
yeah, and for me, it's just an excuse to expand police power.
Of course.
Expand, and in both ways, like to normalize it in a cultural way, but also to create through this dialectical process to make it in a legal way. And I think that
you need us, otherwise, what are you going to do without us against these Habs fans, against these kinds of riots, protests as well?
Exactly. And the most important thing is like, well, they have no credibility because they walked off the job how many years ago to get what they want. So who's to say that they're not always doing that?
Totally.
And then again, this isn't a conspiracy theory, right? It's the institutional form in which that the police take. It's a monopoly on violence that is to either maintain or expand their power. And this is just a picture perfect example of it.
Do you think? What do you think is going to happen for the rest of the series, or even if we move up another one? Do you think we see continued police deployment?
I mean, I was at Game 3 last night, and there was a large police presence. I didn't think there was going to be because it was a deciding game. It wasn't a deciding game, but the fans aren't going to calm down. The Montreal Canadiens haven't had a win like this in full buildings in a couple of years. The 2021 instance was great, but
the building wasn't full,
and we were in a pandemic, right? Now we can really relish it, and we should be able to relish it without this type of brutalizing. It's going to be summertime. It's going to be warmer. The crowds are going to get bigger. Yeah, I think. I do really think that it's going to expand and it's going to continue, and that's why I think it's important for people to be aware of this. And the biggest thing is, like I said, don't cheer on the cops when they do this. Like it's very detrimental to public safety because it normalizes that type of behavior.
A Habs fan is a Habs fan. No one deserves to be beat up by the cops.
Yeah, we're all equal.
Absolutely. Under the eyes of Ken Hughes, we're all equal. Where can people follow you and see more stuff that you're posting, making?
Follow me on Instagram at Spark Solidarity and at sparksolidarity.ca. Terrific.
Thanks so much, Alex, for coming on, talking to me about hockey. There's so much more that we could talk about. I think I really enjoyed our discussion. We talked about the early kind of class dynamics in those riots, and then how the ways that these kinds of lawsuits change the way that the police is interacting with the crowds here in Montreal. I think specifically, I really appreciate you coming and talking about the differences in how these big public sports events are policed in places like Toronto versus Montreal. It's not like this is not like widespread everywhere. This is clearly like it's a choice to kind of be that violent.
It's a choice. Yeah,
it's a choice to be that violent against the crowd.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think as members of the public, we have to question that choice by these public institutions.
Yeah, big time.
Go Habs, go! Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've been enjoying the footage that you've been seeing on screen. That's by our new journalist, Paul. We also have some footage brought to you by
William Wilson.
I want to say Wilson Williams, but William Wilson, as well as
Josh Fisher.
Thank you so much for that footage. I hope the video viewers have been enjoying that, and I hope the audio listeners has been enjoying the sweet dulcet sounds of our voice. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Till next time.